Thanks for joining us today for this Q&A class. Basically, the way this class is going to work is a little bit different to the other ones that we've ran so far. The other ones were more about learning content and teaching, whereas this one really is more about helping you in areas where maybe you're finding it a little bit difficult in verbal reasoning. And we've got quite a lot of difficult questions that have been sent through for verbal reasoning in particular that we're going to be running through. We're going to give you all a chance to answer them under time pressure, and then we're going to break down how to answer those ones correctly. We're also going to be going through a few essays that have been sent in and giving feedback to them as well. And the first place we're going to start is with this prompt, which is, should the government implement a ban on junk food for people under the age of 18? And we're just going to break down an essay that was sent through for this one, give it some feedback, and just sort of see what could be done to turn this into a really high-performing piece. And so as you might remember, I'll just turn this into white so it's easy to read. Perfect. But when we're planning a persuasive piece, we want to spend not too much time on it, so probably 3 to 4 minutes at the most. And we want to create a plan like this. So you want to have your stance very clearly. So my stance is that they should implement a ban on junk food or they shouldn't. And as we mentioned in the last lesson, you really want to be using the words from the prompt. If you change the words too much, that's going to work against you and it may be potentially seen as being off prompt. So that's one key thing there. You want to come up with 2 really strong points for your point of view. And this is one of the key things which particularly as I've been reading a lot of prompts and a lot of pieces that have been sent through, one of the biggest factors that determines the quality of these pieces is these arguments. And so I really would focus on these last few weeks, really developing your ability to come up with good arguments. Because what I found is if the writing's a little bit lacking, but the arguments are strong, as an assessor, you read it and you think this is still quite a good piece of writing. But if the prompts are, or the arguments aren't too strong, but the writing's good, it still really does lack the type of thing that they're looking for on the exam. So I know I've emphasized it a lot, but the quality of your arguments really does go a very long way to determining the quality of your piece. And same thing as the counter argument, your ability to look at one side, but also look at the other. Students who have very strong arguments, they instantly elevate themselves to that next level. When I've been reading through different pieces, as soon as you see a student who's really got good arguments, instantly you put them into that top echelon. So that's really something I'd focus on. And so we're going to look at the student who sent through a plan for this prompt. And this is what their plan says. So firstly, they've got their stance. They say that the government shouldn't implement a plan on junk food for people under the age of 18. So this is good. They've just mirrored the words back that were used in the prompt. So for this one, I'll give this a tick. And I would say this is really good. Nice and clear. And then their first argument is because it teaches children an unhealthy form of diet culture. And so as an examiner, when I'm reading this, I'm thinking, so it teaches them an unhealthy form of diet culture. And I'm probably thinking, what exactly does diet culture mean? It's not sort of a word combination that I hear used all the time. And so I get a sense of probably what you're looking to convey. However, it's not instantly clear. And one of the things that you've got to consider is when the examiners are reading your pieces, they're not just reading your one piece with a cup of tea before they go to bed, relaxed. They're probably reading like 50 of these in a row. And so if it's not clear, they probably don't have a huge amount of patience to think, oh, well, maybe they meant this, maybe they meant that. They're probably just going to say, okay, I don't understand it. And so with this one, probably one of the main things I'll look to improve is just like clarity of argument. How can you make it so that when someone reads your argument, instantly, they know what you mean? So for example, a different example would be, it teaches children unhealthy food habits. That's something which people know what habits are. They know what unhealthy foods are, unhealthy food habits straight away. I know, yes, okay, that's a reasonable point. That's very clear. And so with this one, I really would focus on clarity because that's really one of the things you want to be getting through in your plan, but then also in your opening paragraph. So this one main focus point would be clarity. The second one here is because it doesn't teach children how to have a balanced diet. So this one is clear. So we're sort of saying if you implement a ban on junk food, then students are automatically going to be forced not to eat it. And so they're not going to have to learn themselves how to have a balanced diet, which is a good point. So I'd say this is very clear, number one, and it is also compelling. And so this point, as an examiner, I would say stance, really good. This first argument, not as strong. This second argument, strong and clear. The counter argument then, so we say, on the other hand, critics would argue that people under the age of 18 don't have a similar sense of control as to those over the age of 18 and have a higher chance of binging or becoming overweight. Again, this is a really strong point because we know that for people under the age of 18, they have often they have to wait to do things. For example, you can't vote when you're under the age of 18, you can't drive a car, you can't drink alcohol. So there's already a precedent that some things are not allowed for students under the age of 18. And so if you use that as a part of this argument, I would say that's quite a strong argument. So I'd say that one's clear, and it's also pretty compelling, and it's also pretty logical. The counter argument to that is, however, by teaching young impressionable minds that a certain thing, in this case junk foods, shouldn't be induced, is only fueling their drive to try it. And again, I'd say there is one small spelling mistake here. So if it's only filling or fueling, let's just say it's fueling their drive to try it. I'd say that's, again, really clear. So I'd say overall, this plan is pretty good. I would say most of these points are quite strong. And really, it's just this one here, because it teaches children an unhealthy form of diet culture. It is potentially not clear enough, but I also think it is quite similar to the second argument. So as a key takeaway, one thing with your arguments, make sure they're really clear, number one, but also make sure that they're quite different. And this is one of the things which examiners really will mark you down for. If the arguments are too similar, or for example, if you rebut this on the other hand, so your however here, if this is really similar to these two arguments, it just sort of shows that you're lacking ideas and you're lacking arguments and you're lacking the ability to really critically think through different arguments on either side. And you've just got these one or two arguments and you're using them for everything. And so making sure they're different is a really big thing I'd focus on for a piece like this. And just to hear from other people on what they would have said, everyone, before we move on, everyone just leave in the chat one other argument that we could have used that we think would be stronger potentially than these arguments. So I'll give you all 1 minute. So I'll put a timer on, and it's time for you to find your one best argument for this prompt. And as soon as you've got it, just leave it in the chat. So the timer is going on now. 1 minute starts now. Perfect. So we've got some arguments coming through. 5 seconds left. Time is up. So what we're going to do, because it's a small class today, we're actually going to quickly run through everything, all the ideas people have sent through. So one of the ideas that someone had, and I'll just put it on the screen down here. This was one of the new ideas that we had, is that it will eventually, so just being careful of spelling there, will eventually lead to mental health problems like bulimia and anorexia. So this is an interesting one. One of the things which we need to be really careful of is we need to be really careful of assumptions. And so this is one of the things which examiners have called out in past years. You know, we want to make sure that when we're talking about things, we don't make assumptions that something will happen to everyone or that it will happen to most people if that isn't the case. So for example, should the government implement a ban on junk food for people under the age of 18? Is it possible for some people to eventually develop mental health problems like bulimia and anorexia? It's definitely possible, but it will not be likely for everyone. Let's say, how many people do we think that could happen to? Maximum, maybe 10, 20%, definitely not 100%, probably pretty unlikely 50%. And so even if that was the intention for it not to be everyone, we've got to be really careful in the way we speak. And so an example of how we could have changed this is we could say it may lead to the development of mental health problems like this for this reason. So I want to know exactly why do we think it leads to those problems and make that really clear. The logic has to be there. So it's like, okay, we're implementing a ban on junk food. How does that lead to these problems? We never want there to be a jump. We want it to be that people maybe feel like they don't have enough choice and that leads to certain things, or people feel like they don't have access to food. There's probably different reasons we could have there for how it leads to that end result of mental health problems. We want to make that logic really clear, number one. And we want to make sure we're not making any assumptions that it's going to happen to everyone or that it's something that is going to happen to everyone, like I said. And so let's just look at another one here. And I'll just paste this one in. So another argument here is, as the consequences of their diet choices, so I'm just letting a student in, as a consequence of their diet choices will help them to learn from their mistakes. Now, again, this is the thing that I really like about this one is it's very, very clear. So by allowing people to have junk food, they'll see the consequences of their diet choices themselves, and that will allow them to learn from their mistakes. And so really what I'd say about this particular argument is, number one, is very clear. That's a real tick. And I'd also say it's very compelling. It's a type of argument where I wouldn't have thought a lot of students are going to give this argument. It is a little bit different. It also does require a little bit level of a deeper thinking. So as an examiner, I think, okay, this person's thinking about that. If students actually have the chance to experiment with junk food themselves, it'll allow them to test it, see how they feel. Sometimes they maybe will have junk food and afterwards they'll feel a bit slower, or they'll feel that they go to study and they don't feel as alert. And they'll be allowed to learn from their mistakes over time themselves. And so I'd say that particular argument, very strong and very compelling. And so that's a very good one. Let's have a look here at another one, which is that students under the age of 18 deserve a treat every once in a while. This is, again, one which is pretty clear, or it's definitely very clear. So I'll give it a tick for that. It's very clear. In terms of compelling, I'd say, yes, it is quite compelling. Probably not quite as compelling as the other one. If you think about students deserving a treat every once in a while compared to students actually get to learn from their mistakes and understand how foods make them feel themselves, that one probably comes from a little bit of a deeper level of thinking. However, this one is still a strong argument. And I'd say if you use this one, if the piece is written well, you're still going to be really on track for a high score. So again, clear and a very good argument, I would say. Let's have a look at two more quickly. We've got one argument here, which is they contain dangerous chemicals called GMOs, which can be harmful for the developing minds of children and teens. And so again, this is interesting because you're bringing in some outside knowledge, which is that junk food can contain dangerous chemicals called GMOs, which can be harmful for the developing minds of children and teens. One thing I would be really careful of is, similar with what we said before about making assumptions or saying something's a certainty, it's definitely true. We would say that some junk food does contain dangerous chemicals like GMOs, but some junk food doesn't. For example, you could go to McDonald's and you could order a salad, or you can order an apple, or you could order some water or coffee. There's a lot of things you can get from junk food places, which would still kind of be called, it's from a junk food restaurant, or even some other junk food things, maybe some sandwiches. They're probably, maybe because they're cooked at a junk food restaurant, maybe they're not as healthy as if they were cooked at home, but they may not contain GMOs. And so really the thing with this one is, I would say it's good that you've brought in external knowledge, and that is going to be a real differentiator. So it's a differentiated argument, which is really good. But I'll just say be careful of assumptions and certainties. So really, if you wanted to make this a really strong answer, I would say that the government should consider a ban on junk food for people under the age of 18, because some junk foods contain dangerous chemicals called GMOs, which can be harmful for the developing minds of children and teens. If you use that argument, you said some junk foods, I would say that's an extremely strong argument, because you've brought in external knowledge. It shows that you've brought in things and you have an understanding of the world beyond just what's written already and given to you. And so I'd say that's a really good one. One more question here, which is one more argument, which is the banning of junk food can lead to complex social and economic factors. This is one where I'd say it's probably a little bit too broad, because we're saying it can lead to complex and social and economic factors. And really, I'll just bring this back to, in the last session, we talked about the lounge room test. If you had all your friends around, you're trying to debate on this issue, what would they say if you said this? And if you said the banning of junk food can lead to complex social and economic factors, I'll probably say, what are those factors? How important are those factors? I would have a lot of questions. And so this one's probably a little bit too open. And so this really comes back to try and make your arguments as specific as possible. So for example, if you had have said the banning of junk food can lead to complex economic factors, for example, junk food corporations may face severe economic struggles, and that will have a flow-on effect in that they hire a lot of people in the world. And so it's going to reduce jobs, which is quite a big nuanced argument, but that's a lot more specific. And instantly someone gets that, it's specific and it's clear. And so I think there's a lot you could do with that broad argument, but I want to get more specific on this one to make it really strong. We've just got one question. Can we send through essays for review? They are handwritten. Yes. If you do have any essays which you would like to get through, we've already got quite a lot, so there's no guarantees we'll be able to get through them today. If not, then I'll just send you a few notes after the lesson. But you can send them to my email, which I'll just post in the chat if anyone doesn't have access to. So yeah, if you've got an essay which you want to send it through there. We'll try and cover it today. If not, we will cover it. I'll just send you some notes after this really quickly. And so that's really good. So we spent a bit of time on talking about these arguments, and the reason for that is because just consistently it's the biggest thing that differentiates students in this. So really, if you can spend time every single day from now until your exam talking about with your parents or with a friend and really coming up with strong arguments, it's going to give you a massive advantage, because sometimes if the arguments aren't strong enough, which maybe on 50% of the essays I read or more, maybe 70%, that the arguments are so weak that it really limits what you can get. You're not going to be getting a top score just because the arguments are too weak, even if they're written well. So really focus on that. It's going to give you a big advantage. We did have one other question on this sort of area, which is how can you incorporate evidence into your persuasive essay when you don't know much about the topic? So for example, if it's a topic about rockets and you don't know anything about rockets, how can you use evidence? And so one thing is a logical connection. This is probably what I use most. So for example, with what we just talked about with junk food, we could say that having a ban on junk food leads to financial stress on junk food companies, which leads to potential job losses, which leads to impacts on economy plus people. So that's something where we didn't have any evidence about this. We didn't know the financial stress that it could have. We didn't know if it would be a certain level of money or another level of money. We didn't know how many job losses. We didn't know the true impact of the economy, but it's pretty logical. We know that if you ban junk food, obviously junk food companies are going to get less sales. That's going to flow through. And if they have less sales, they're not going to have as many people to employ. And we know that fast food companies employ a lot of people. So it is going to have an impact on the economy and people to some sort. And the thing that's good about these logical connections is it really shows the examiner that you can think through. Like a lot of students, they're not going to think through properly what an issue actually does. They're just going to say ban on junk foods, less money. And that's sort of where it lies. And they'll maybe back up with, oh, it's going to cost these companies billions of dollars, which is interesting, but it's a lot less compelling than someone who can think through this. Because really, if you think about it from the examiner's perspective, they're trying to find students who are good thinkers, who are good writers, who can really come up with strong arguments on both sides. And if you can show that you can come up with these type of logical connections, which you can probably come up with any prompt as evidence, it's really going to elevate your score. Another one is a comparison. So we could say, let's say if we banned junk food, we would also have to ban other potentially harmful foods and activities. So let's say, really we could use a comparison here. So we could say junk food, we know that it's harmful for people's health. What about something like skateboarding? We know that a lot of students get injured on skateboards. Yes, they enjoy it, like they enjoy having junk food, and there is some health benefits to it on the counter. But so many students, when they're young, they fall off skateboards and they get injured. And so if you ban junk food, why wouldn't we ban skateboards? Same thing. There's a lot of comparisons that we could make. For example, even driving a car, it's dangerous. Should students not be allowed to be in cars while they're under the age of 18? Should they be protected? That's probably not quite as strong. You do want to think, is it a really strong argument, which there would be comparisons that would be strong. Maybe the skateboard one would be better, or maybe there's food that isn't classified as a junk food that you're eating, which is probably still not good for you. And so that's probably something that I consider. How can you make a comparison between this and that and use that as evidence why that argument is stronger or weaker? Another thing is just broader implications. So what does it impact society as a whole? So, for example, with the ban on junk foods, a classic one is if we're banning junk foods, where does that means the government is having more control over our lives and dictating more and more around our freedom and liberty. And so what broader implication would this have? So would this mean that the government would now be able to control how often we had sugar and junk foods after the age of 18? Would they be able to control how much risk we took in general life with our finances? Would there be controls on our bank accounts? We don't spend too much over a daily or weekly period. Well, that would maybe seem a bit excessive, but maybe potentially by banning junk food, it opens up that scope for the government to take away more freedom and restrict us further in everyday life. That's probably another key area which you can do. Broader implications. It's a pretty easy way of coming up with evidence. And so these are really the three easiest ones that I use: logical connections, comparison, broader implications. You can, of course, use stats, but if you have access to them. But I think a lot of the time that's really what students instantly go to. A lot of students are thinking, what stats can I use? Or if we ban junk food, corporations are going to lose billions of dollars. A lot of people are going to say that. And so I think logical connections, comparisons, and broader implications are probably going to allow you to stand out a lot better. And so I would look towards that if you can. Let's quickly run through this essay now and just give a little bit of feedback on it. So this is their introduction. So we're looking for a sentence which provides a bit of context. So the government shouldn't implement a ban on junk foods for people under the age of 18. That's good. So that's their stance. Very clear. First of all, prohibiting junk food for people under the age of 18 imprints the ideology into children's minds that junk food isn't safe in their hands, which is a stronger argument with the way that this is written, which that is a strong argument. So I'd say very clear, strong. This teaches them an unhealthy idea of diets that they will practice even when they're older. This one, it's not super clear. So first of all, prohibiting junk food for people under the age of 18 imprints the ideology into children's minds that junk food isn't safe in their hands. That's clear. But this teaches them an unhealthy idea of diets that they'll practice when they're older. I don't fully understand I do understand what you're saying, but I don't think it comes through as clearly as it could. I think something which would have been stronger is if we said, first of all, prohibiting junk foods for people under the age of 18 imprints the ideology that it isn't safe in their hands. Possibly leading to poor health habits in the future. Something like that. Once they can actually use it, then once they can have junk food, then it's going to lead to poor habits because they're not used to knowing how to eat that in moderation. Secondly, it doesn't teach children how to have a balanced diet. For these reasons, the government shouldn't prohibit people under the age of 18 for accessing junk food. So I think as a whole, this opening paragraph, it's very clear. You followed the right structure. So from that perspective, tick, tick. Really, the feedback is just what we talked about with the plan. How can you have more difference in your arguments so they're quite different points of view rather than similar? And how can you make them a little bit stronger? Really, that's the two key things which would improve this piece. Otherwise, from a logic and a structure perspective, it is good. First paragraph, firstly, prohibiting junk food for people under the age of 18 imprints the ideology into children's mind that junk food isn't safe in their hands. By forcing a diet onto them, the government will teach them unhealthy lifestyle practices, such as overindulging once they reach the government set age, since they were deprived of it up until that point, or resent any food type that the government deems junk. And so this, again, is actually really well written. It's very clear. It's a good example of a logical way of explaining the point. So we say by forcing a diet onto them, the government will teach them unhealthy lifestyle practices, such as indulging. Very, very clear. I'd say this argument's good. One key thing which I'd really be careful of, as we've mentioned a few times, is be very careful of assumptions or saying something is a certainty. And I'd say in this paragraph, we may take a mark away just because it does make it sound like that for all students. By forcing a diet on them, the government will teach them unhealthy lifestyle practices. I'd say it could teach them unhealthy lifestyle practices, but it will not definitely teach them that. And this is it is just one word, but it makes a real difference to the meaning of the piece. And so one key takeaway from this is I'd say just make sure we're not making assumptions, we're not saying certainties if we don't know it to be true. And it finishes off with children will continue to practice these unhealthy ideas of diet throughout life. Same thing here. Just be very careful about making assumptions. We don't know that children will continue to practice these unhealthy habits. If we said some children may continue to practice these unhealthy habits, it sounds like maybe you're toning it down, but it's actually a lot stronger because we just know logically that not all students are going to have unhealthy habits. Some will, but some won't. And so factoring that into your argument is really important. And so I'd say really assumptions and certainty is a key thing I'd focus on with this one. Second paragraph, secondly, to have a balanced diet and to learn from which foods. Secondly, to have a balanced diet and to learn from which foods and how much of certain foods our bodies can handle. I understand the point you're making here, but ideally this sentence could be a little bit shorter and sharper and explain a little bit more. So we could say, secondly, it is important for children to, let's just go back to your contentions. We're saying government shouldn't implement a ban. And so I'd say something which would be clearer would be, secondly, it is important for children to learn themselves the impacts of junk food on their health. This is something which is very clear, and it sort of goes into your point, but just in a clearer way. It's very short, it's sharp, it's clear. Secondly, it is important for children to learn themselves the impact of junk food on their health. Children should be eating a variety of food. This doesn't mean that junk food can be seen. So I think this one here, it's not super clear. So children should be eating a variety of different foods as a part of a healthy diet. However, this doesn't mean that junk food should be excluded entirely. For example, that's potentially a way of having that same point. So secondly, it is important for children to learn themselves the impacts of junk food on their health. Children should be eating a variety of different foods as a part of a healthy diet. However, this doesn't mean that junk food should be excluded entirely. And would have a sentence here just linking back as a part of the teal structure. So we've had the opening paragraph introducing it. We've had this one here. Ideally, we'd want to bring in a bit of evidence. So what's the evidence of this? And then we'd link back. So this paragraph, I'd say from a structural perspective, was maybe lacking a little bit of evidence and lacking that linking back, and potentially could have been a little bit clearer. So really the three things I'd focus on is clarity. Shorter sentences makes it easier to write really compellingly. Bring in evidence, make sure you have that simple sentence with some sort of evidence that we talked about before, and then just make sure there's that linking back sentence. I know I did play around with your paragraph, so it does read differently, but we always want to be using the teal structure. So topic sentence, explanation, evidence, and then linking back. Let's have a look at the rebuttal here. So critics would argue that people under the age of 18 don't have a similar sense of control as to those over the age of 18 and have a higher chance of binging or becoming overweight because of them having access to junk food. This argument is clear, but I'd say shorter sentences, if you can, just makes it easier for the examiner to read, and it just makes it read a little bit more stylishly and flows a little bit better. So if we can make it shorter sentences, that is a good thing. And then, however, by teaching young impressionable minds that a certain thing, in this case junk food, shouldn't be induced is only fueling. So that says fooling, which is a spelling mistake. So let's say it was fueling or filling their drive to try. So that's good. It's pretty clear. Arguments are strong. And the conclusion is to conclude a significant effect of enforcing a ban on junk food for people under the age of 18 is that it sets all future adults with disordered eating habits and isn't a way of preventing people under the 18 from indulging. And so again here, really just the same thing as we talked about before. We really want to avoid making assumptions or saying certainties. And if I asked everyone, does having a ban on junk food definitely set all future adults with disordered eating habits? People would say no. There's definitely some that would have disordered eating habits from it, and the points you've raised are strong, but not all. And so it might maybe feel like by toning it down, you're making your arguments weaker, but you're actually showing a deeper level of thinking, and that showing that you've thought through the issue really well. You understand that it doesn't impact everyone. It impacts maybe 10%, but 10% of people having disordered eating from this change would actually still be a negative result. It doesn't have to impact everyone, and you've really thought that through. And so again, with this last one here, really focusing on assumptions and certainty is something which you just want to fix straight away, because it's an easy thing. It's really easy for you to fix it, and it's instantly going to elevate this piece. And so overall, as a whole, I'd say this piece is quite strong. The main things I'd focus on is avoiding assumptions and certainties. So don't make assumptions, don't make certainties if it's not definitely true. Try to have short sentences if you can. Make sure you're following the teal structure, and really just focus on having really strong arguments. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to the next piece. We'll go through this one quickly, and then we're going to get stuck into some verbal reasoning questions, which will be fun and a bit of variety to what we've been going through here. And so this Essay is write a persuasive piece arguing whether or not public transport should be made free for all citizens. And so let's have a look at this opening paragraph. And so we say, in the midst of the cost of living crisis in Australia, so this is good. This is showing a broader context that inflation is happening, things are becoming more expensive. And so I would say, I would give this a big tick straight away. Good info. Critics are calling for transport to be made free. Clear, to the point. That's really strong. Despite how good this sounds, in practicality, this would not be beneficial. Again, that's nice and clear. Companies now would receive less money, which would result in degraded services. So that's one strong argument. That making public transport free would lead to companies making less money, which would result in worse services. Very good. Good use of this word as well. It does really make you stand out when you have good vocab. And overall crowds for public transport would drastically skyrocket. This is a good one, but similar with what we said before, be really careful about assumptions. Is it possible that making it free wouldn't skyrocket it? Potentially, particularly because you said skyrocket. If it just goes up a little bit, I'd say that's not skyrocketing. And so I'd say an overall crowds for public transport could drastically skyrocket. That's much stronger. So just be really careful with assumptions and certainty. It's a thing a lot of students do, and just by avoiding it, you're really going to elevate your piece. So we've got next paragraph here, which is the first paragraph. Let's see how it follows the teal structure. So we say, in Australia's free market society where major sectors like public transport is maintained by private companies, with the absence of money facilities. Okay, so I think the grammar in this one could be improved a little bit. So we say, in Australia, which is one other tip I'll give you, is always in the editing time, read through it and try to even speak it in your head and just see how it flows. So if you listen to it as I'm trying to speak it, in Australia's free market society, where major sectors like public transport are maintained by private companies, I'd have another comma here because I'm still speaking, with the absence of sufficient capital, I'd say rather than money if you can, it is possible, or it is likely, that facilities will become degraded. And so same thing here again, be really careful of certainties and assumptions. It's likely that facilities will become degraded, it's not certain, and just really be careful with the punctuation and grammar. This is a result of lack of resources made available to maintain public transport facilities. Any extra funding given to the companies would simply hoarded, as companies need to make a profit in order to service. And so I think this one, the argument as a whole, so if I look at this first sentence, I'd say this is a very strong argument. However, I feel like the execution of it in terms of the explanation and the evidence could have been a little bit stronger. And if it was stronger, I think it would be really pushing for an extremely high score. And so let's just break it down. So we've got the first topic sentence, which is, in Australia's free market society where major sectors like public transport are maintained by private companies, in the absence of sufficient capital, is likely that facilities will become degraded. Clear, strong. Facilities may become degraded as with a lack of resources. So yeah, we really would need to think about how to make it stronger. So facilities may become degraded. So I'd always try to make it clear the sentence on its own. This sentence, just when you read it in isolation, it didn't exactly make sense. So I'll try and bring it out again. Facilities may become degraded because governments are often unable to allocate the required capital to maintain public services. So I'd say that's probably a little bit clearer. And then I'll try and bring in some sort of evidence. So the evidence you've got here is any funding given to the companies would simply be hoarded, as companies need to make a profit in order to survive. I'd say this is some evidence. It's probably not the best evidence I could give. I'd probably try and look for a comparison. So I'd say, for example, public housing is sometimes underfunded and left to be run down, which could easily be the same case for free public transport. That's really a way of just thinking. An easy way of looking for those examples is what's a comparison, what's something else that's similar, and in this case, public housing or something else that's free or very highly subsidized is probably a good example, something which the government does, which they potentially don't allocate the right amount of funds for. Same, you could say roads, when roads are looked after by the government, they only have a certain amount of money, so often eventually they get run down and are sort of lacking what they would need to be a really good road. So let's see how it links back. So it says, therefore, funding in the form of payment is necessary for facilities to be maintained. That's good. Again, same thing. We want to make sure that these sentences make sense on their own. So if I just read this on their own, therefore, funding in the form of payment for what? There's not that context there. So therefore, funding in the form of payment for transport, for public transport, is necessary for facilities to maintain. So say that's made it quite a lot stronger. The first sentence was already pretty strong, but we just wanted, in terms of the argument, we just wanted to make it flow a little bit better. We added a clearer explanation, a little bit of extra evidence, and then we've got the linking sentence. So they're probably the main things I would look to improve in future, but overall that argument is strong. It's very, very strong. And because of that, there is a little bit of leeway in these other areas. Let's look at this next one. So under free public transport, crowds would massively increase, causing transport services to malfunction. Same thing again here, would. We want to change that to could. That's a key thing. Really be careful of these assumptions. And since there would be an incentive to travel free, this could cause an influx of pedestrians. Interesting. So it could. I wonder what that means. All the already decrepit facilities under free transport could now malfunction. The government needs to accommodate for the increased crowd before attempting to make transport cost free. Very good. That's a good argument. And so I'd say really here in this paragraph, let's say the first and the last paragraphs are extremely strong. Aside from that one edit, I'll just really focus on the explanation and the evidence. So an example would be under free public transport, crowds could massively increase, causing transport services to malfunction. Since there would be an incentive to travel free, this could cause an influx of passengers in stations, trains, and trams, which would put facilities under stress. These facilities may have only been designed to hold a certain number of passengers that typically came under a paid public transport system. And so moving to a free system would be unleashing a huge amount of passengers into these stations, trains, and trams and these facilities just weren't built for that. And so an argument like that, some sort of logical argument, is probably the way I'd do it, which is very similar to the way you've done it, but I just really try and make it a little bit clearer. So really what I'd focus on is I'd say those first and last paragraphs very strong. But I'd say as a focus for you on the next one of these essays is really focus on explanation plus evidence. I'd say similar with the last paragraph, that was really the stuff that I thought could be improved. So really focus on the meat of those paragraphs, which is the explanation and the evidence. Let's have a quick look at the critique. So critics often mention that free transport will benefit the poor. While this could be the case, middle-class people might hoard the services, leaving poor people to be thrown in a rat race to get a spot on public transport. This is probably one that I'd say I'm not sure if it's as strong of an argument. And if it is, I would probably want to know the explanation for it. So will benefit the poor, I'd say that's strong. It will benefit people who are maybe disadvantaged and generally can't afford it. That's probably the way that I would say it. It will benefit people who may not be able to afford paid public transport. I'd say good argument. Whilst this could be the case, middle-class people might hoard the services. I'd say this is probably not as good argument. Another argument could have just been going back to your crowds one. We could say, whilst this could be the case, it could lead to massive crowds, which means both disadvantaged people and advantaged people are regularly missing out, and it becomes an unviable solution for both of them. Something like that. And it would have been stronger. Conclusion. So good that there is a conclusion here. However, one of the things which I would really say is by using the word moreover, we could use it, but it does kind of make me think that there's more to come because it starts with more. And so as an examiner, I'd probably say potentially just keep it simple, maybe to say in conclusion. We can deduce why making public transport cost-free is ineffective and pointless. This is something, I'd say the conclusion here is something which would take a few marks away, just because by saying something is pointless and ineffective, they are massive statements. And so one thing I'd say is really be careful with making massive statements. It's the same thing with assumptions. It's the same thing with certainty. Saying it's completely pointless is a massive statement to make. And so I'd probably try and make it a little bit nuanced. And same thing with the conclusion. All you need to do is just restate stance and 2 arguments. And so I would bring up your arguments, particularly when you don't have your arguments here again. When you're making these really strong statements, like it's ineffective, it's pointless, I probably would just bring in the argument. So let's say, in conclusion, we can deduce that making public transport free is an ineffective solution because it could lead to massive overcrowding on public transport, and it could also lead to facilities and public transport systems in general becoming run down. That would be a very clear, very simple conclusion. And so with conclusions, I'd really focus on make sure you use the structure of restate stance and just quickly restate your 2 paragraphs. It really doesn't take too much extra time. And just be careful about making really big assumptions like that. And so we've gone through 2 essays now. We're going to change it up a little bit, and we're going to go through some verbal reasoning questions. And I will say a lot of these ones are the more difficult types of questions that you can typically see. And so if you find them challenging, that's okay. They're not all going to be like this, most likely. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 36 seconds to go through this question, and then we're going to run through the answer together. So timer starts now. Five seconds left. Time is up, and just pop your answer in the chat when you've got it, and we'll just see what the consensus is. No worries. Thanks, Olivia. We'll make the recording available to everyone, so no worries if you have to jump off early. So it looks like we don't have any, so we've got D. Okay, perfect. Thanks for popping that one through. Let's have a look, D, again. Okay, look, sounds like everyone's got it pretty well. What I will do is I will just, another D, okay, perfect. So what I'll do is I won't spend too long on it then because it looks like a lot of people got it right, but I will quickly break down a few key things to focus on when you've got these types of questions. One key thing, which I like to do, is just noting here, there's 8 drivers, there's 5 cars. And so I try to find what those are. I try to get one person in each of those 5 cars first. So let's say car 1, I want to find someone in that car. Car 2, I want to find someone in that car. Car 3, car 4, and car 5. And I wouldn't write down car 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but just for explanation's sake, I'd just put the names in that order and try and figure out the car. So we know that Kane is in the first sled. So it's sled rather than cars, that's okay. We know Kane is in sled 1. And we know Tom is in the final sled. So that's good to know. So we've got our pillars. We know Kane's here. We know Tom's here. 2 of the 5 cars are sorted. Let's read along. Kane is in, Alvin, Charlie, and Jane are in consecutive sleds. So right now, that doesn't tell us anything, but that's going to be useful later on because it's going to tell us that we need to find Alvin, Charlie, and Jane. They're going to need to be in a row, which is good. Jane is in the sled right before Jeff. Okay, again, we don't know where Jeff is. We don't know where Jane is. And so that doesn't give us any information. Lily is in the sled that is after Jan, but before Jeff. Okay, so we know that Lily is in the sled that is after Jan, but before Jeff. And Jeff is before Tom. Okay, so we know that Jeff is therefore in car 4. So we know that Kane's definitely in car 1, Jeff is definitely in car 4. Tom's definitely in car 5. So we've got a bit of information now. Now we can go through and use this information to fill up the rest. So we know Jane is in the sled right before Jeff. Perfect. Jane is here. We also then knew that Alvin, Charlie, and Jane had to be in a row. And so we know that if Jane's here, then Charlie has to be in number 2. And then Kane and Alvin are therefore in number 1. So we've got a bit more information now. So car 1 is full. There's 2 drivers in there. Car 2 so far just has Charlie. Is there anyone else who in there? So let's run through. Jane is in the sled right before Jeff. Yes. Lily is in the sled that is after Jan. Or before Jeff. Okay, so we know that Lily is before Jeff. So Jane and Lily are in car 3. And Lily's in the sled that's after Jan. So Charlie and Jan are in car 2. So now we know car 1 is Kane and Alvin. Car 2 is Charlie and Jan. Car 3 is Lily and Jane. Car 4, Jeff, and car 4, Tom. And so therefore the correct answer is Jeff and Tom. So well done to everyone who got that one correct. Really the key thing I'd really focus on with these questions is they are time consuming, they are tricky. But just try and get one person in each car first. And just really take note of this information at the start. There's 8 drivers, there's 5 cars. Try and get one driver in each car, and it's going to make figuring out the rest a lot more easy. And so let's go to this next question, which is on ordering information. Again, I'll give you 36 seconds to do this one. Let's get started now. Leave your answer in the comments once you're ready. 15 seconds left. 10. Last 5. Get in your answers. Time's up. So I'll just wait for you to pop in your answers when you have them. A. A. Okay, let's have a look at this. So we've got a few students putting A. So let's map this out. And this is a little bit of a trick one for one reason, which does make it a little bit difficult. And so let's say here, Minson's Manufacturing creates scarves that are sold in separate boxes. Okay. There are 5 boxes placed on a conveyor belt, with the box closest to the end of the conveyor belt is the first to be packed. Okay, so one student's now shifted to D. Let's have a look. So this is one key thing I'd look at here. There are 5 boxes placed on a conveyor belt, and the box closest to the end of the conveyor belt is the first to be packed. And so what we actually know is the end of the conveyor belt is the first to be packed, which is a little bit confusing. So when we're looking for which box is the last to be packed, we're actually looking for it to be the furthest away from the end of the conveyor belt, so the end of the conveyor belt. So it is a little bit confusing the way that they've worded it like that. So let's have a look. So we know that box 11 is further away from the end. When we say the end, we mean the end of the conveyor belt, which is actually the first to be packed. And so box 11 is further away than box 76 from the end. So we know that 76, 11. Let's just put here first to be packed, which is the end. So we've got 76. 11 is further away than 76. We know that, yes. Box 98 is further than box 88, but closer than box 11 to the end. So we know that box 98 is closer than 11 to the end. So it's closer to the end here. And we know that 88 is further than box 98, but closer than box 11. So we don't exactly know where box 88 is. And box 55 is closer to the end than box 88 and 76. So you know it's closer than, okay, so we know it has to be up here. So 55, 76, 98, 88. And then we know that 88, therefore, Box 98 is further than box 88. So it is 38, but closer than box 11. And so it looks like 88 would be here. And so I'd actually say that the correct answer on this one would be box 11. This would be the one that's furthest. This is the one that's actually furthest away from the end of the conveyor belt, which is therefore the last to be packed. And so really, I think, let me know if that makes sense in the comments, because I know that is a little bit of a tricky one. To me, the thing that really makes it confusing is that first to be packed is the end, and last to be packed is actually the start, which is really confusing. So let's get moving then. Good that that's making sense. Conditional statements. Let's give you 36 seconds again to answer this one. So let's get it going. Leave your comment when you're ready. Got a good question that we'll cover after this. Ten seconds left. Time is up. So it looks like one of the correct answers we're looking at is E. Students have any other answers? B. Perfect. So we've got one answer of E, we've got one of B, we've got some of other ones as well. And just before I get into how to solve this question, someone had said, how do you solve these types of questions in 30 seconds? Probably referring to this one, but also the one before, which is a more difficult one. One of the things that you really have to consider is in verbal reasoning, you don't have to get 100% of questions right to get a superior. There is room to obviously get questions wrong. And so these types of questions, they are going to take you more time, realistically. If you want to get these questions correct, it's probably going to take you more than the 36 seconds which you're allocated. But there's also going to be questions in verbal reasoning which are going to take you less time than is required. And so really what I'd be looking for is, number one, there's sort of two strategies for this. Number one, identify questions that take you less time than normal and figure out how long you're willing to spend on those questions. Because just because it's 36 seconds per question doesn't mean that every single question should be taken 36 seconds. There's some questions which you really need to be getting correct within 20 seconds. And that will be often pretty similar for a lot of students, but there'll be some questions which just naturally you get easier. You're good at those questions. And for those ones you really want to squeeze and do them as fast as possible, I wouldn't just be happy with 36 seconds. I'd try and get it down to 20. And that's going to allow you with these types of ones, more like 40 seconds, 50 seconds, which is probably what you need. So that's tip one. Identify questions which are going to take you much less time and really train doing those questions as quick as possible in like 20 seconds. And that will give you more time on other questions, which again, I would identify. And so probably as one key takeaway after this, I would make sure I would identify which questions are your easy ones, which you will dedicate less time to. And then I'd also identify your hard ones, which you will dedicate more time to. That's a really key one. A lot of people won't do that, but just because there's a lot of questions where you'll do it comfortably within 36 seconds and people just be like, oh yeah, that's all good. I'm just going to chill on this question because I've got time. So they're the questions you really want to stress on and do them as fast as you can because they're easy ones. That's the first thing. Second thing is just, you can afford to skip some of these longer ones and leave them towards the end. Like often at the end of the exam, the last 10 questions, there's probably going to be a bunch which are easy, which you probably can easily get correct in the time limit. And so if you do want to flag a few, maybe up to 5 for coming back to the end. Like if you see this question, you're like, okay, that question is going to take me, based on what you've done in the past, is going to take you more than 36 seconds. I'm just going to leave that one. I'm going to come back to it at the end if I have time. Then I would do that as well. So they're kind of the two strategies I use. Number one, identify your easy ones and hard ones and figure out how much time you're willing to spend to them on their own. And then also just have it up your sleeve that you can skip a few to the end. And worst case, if you miss a few, that's not the worst thing. Just make sure you put a random answer down. You could still get a superior realistically. And so this one here, this again is a very tricky one. It is a confusing one. It is one which a lot of students will get incorrect. And the reason for that is that if you look at all of these different ones, let's say, so no Jeds are Reds. So we know that some Jeds are Reds, and so therefore is it possible that that no Jeds are Reds? No, that doesn't make sense. If some are, then obviously none of them are. C, all Peds are Neds. Same thing, all of these aren't. I can see a few students coming through with the answer now, and they're saying B, which is yes, it's true. And the reason B is correct, and you've got to be really careful with the wording here, is if you notice with A, C, D, and E, they all say are. So it's saying all Peds are Neds, some Weds are Neds, all Peds are Weds. This one here says some Neds may be Reds. And it doesn't actually give us any information to prove that some Neds are Reds. So if it said some Neds are Reds, we would say, well, we don't know that. You know, if it said no Neds are Reds, we would say we don't know that either. But some Neds may be Reds because we don't have that information. And so this is a little shortcut. If you see them doing this on a question, if you see one option with maybe, you do have to bear in mind that there's a good chance that's the right answer because there's not a very high standard of proof. The difference between are and maybe is pretty massive. If you think about it, are means definitely. It's kind of like what we were talking about before with certainties, whereas maybe means maybe, so possibly. And so the standard of proof is much lower. And so as soon as you see maybe, that's a red flag. I'd probably just go straight for that one and see if that's the correct answer, because often it is. And so it is a bit of a trick one, but I would focus on looking at it that way. Now I've got a few more questions here which students have sent through. A few of these, unfortunately, students, they're questions which we sent out after the verbal reasoning lesson. And unfortunately, some students have gone into the document and I think they've maybe put in their answers to the suggested answers, so they've changed them. Or some students seem to have edited the questions. I'm not sure why they would do that. Maybe they were just having some fun. But unfortunately, if it's edited on one person's screen, it's edited on everyone's screen. And so it means everyone saw someone else's answers as being the correct answers, even if they weren't. For a couple of questions, there was only 4 questions like that. So I'm just going to run through those ones now. I think a lot of them are actually not that difficult. And so people probably had troubles with them just because people had edited them. The issue's been fixed now it's locked, so students can't make changes. But just for context before we go into these ones, in case some of them aren't too difficult. This one, though, was one which is fairly difficult still. And so let's give everyone 36 seconds to go through that one now. So let's go. Leave your answer in the comments when you're ready. The time's up. I'm going to give you all 10 seconds left extra just because this is a more difficult one, and then leave your comment. Okay, so time's up. So leave your answer. Even if you didn't get time, just have a guess, put in what you think it is based on the information you've got, and then we will run through how to answer this one. So we've got someone saying C, which is Sunday. Got someone saying Saturday. We've got another Sunday. Okay, let's have a look. So it looks like a few people are saying C, Saturday. A few people are saying C, Sunday. A few people are saying E, Saturday. Let's have a look. And so Jack is a hairdresser who works on Thursday through to Monday. So that is good to know. That is interesting. We've got another D as well. He has booked Dane, Kane, and Jim on consecutive days. And so if he only works from Thursday through to Monday, that means there's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And so I'm just going to put that down in my head. Normally I wouldn't write this down, but I'm just going to do it for explanations. But just noting, I would definitely note down that there's 4 to 5 days there. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. He's booked Dane, Kane, and Jim on consecutive days. Okay. Jim comes in on Saturday with Nathan. So we know that on Saturday, there is Jim plus Nathan. And we know that these 3 were booked on consecutive days. So we therefore know that Kane was on Friday. and Dane was on Thursday. So we've mapped that all down. That is all making sense. Simon is seen before William, who comes 2 days after Kane. So we know William comes 2 days after Kane. So Kane was on Friday. And so we know that William therefore came on Sunday. Got another answer coming through, which is D. Perfect. So we've got Kane on Thursday. We've got Dane on Thursday, Kane on Friday, Jim and Nathan on Saturday, William on Sunday. And Gary is seen 2 days after Nathan. So Gary, 2 days after Nathan, who was seen on Saturday, would therefore be Monday. And Emily is seen 4 days after Michael. And so where's Michael? We see Emily's coming on Monday, so that's interesting. So we can put Emily here. And then it says Emily seen 4 days after Michael. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So Michael's here. So now we've just got to figure out one last person, which is Simon. Got another answer coming through, which is now B. So it looks like there's a bit of confusion here. So we've got a few interesting things here. We've got Kane on Friday on his own. We've got William on Sunday on his own. We've got to figure out where Simon is. So it says Simon is seen before William. So William's on Sunday. Simon is seen therefore before William. Would it be Saturday? That's what you would think. But the key piece of information here is assuming the maximum booking is 2 people per day. And so because we know that we cannot book 3 people on this day. And Simon, therefore, we know that he came before William, but they never said it was 1 day before William. And so therefore Simon can be placed on Friday. And so really what you can see here is that Dane and Michael are on Thursday, Kane and Simon are on Friday, Jim and Nathan are on Saturday, William is on his own on Sunday, and then Gary and Emily are on together on Monday. And so which day does Jack only have 1 client? It is in fact Sunday. And so really what tricked most people with this question, really the trick was the fact that it said Simon is seen before William. And I know when I initially quickly went through this, I thought, okay, Simon's seen before William, let's put him on Saturday. But then I saw that there was already 2 people here and there's a maximum booking of 2 people per day. And so it just does show you've got to be really careful with reading the question carefully, because if you miss that, assuming the maximum booking is 2 people per day, and we tried to put 3 people on that Saturday, then we're left with 2 days with only 1 person and it gets really confusing. And so the subtleties and the nuances, the difficult questions, they're the ones where you have to read it carefully. And if you miss a piece of information, like if you miss that there's only a maximum of 2 people per day, or if you missed that it says Simon is seen before William, but it doesn't actually say he's seen 1 day before William. It could have been 3 days before William. It could have been a week before William. So it's really important to understand when it says something specific, like 2 days after Kane. We couldn't then say it was 3 days after Kane, as it clearly says 2 days. But if it doesn't specify, then we can sort of figure that out as well. And so the correct answer here was C. Is that making sense to everyone? Does that make sense why people may have been tricked up on that one? If it does, just say yes in the comments, or if anyone has any further questions on this one, because I know it was particularly difficult, let me know and we can go into that. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, perfect. Sounds good. So let's have a look at the next one now, which is conditional statements. Now, I want you to remember what we learned from the question that we just did on this type of question, and I'm going to give you this time 36 seconds. Let's get started now. Don't forget to leave your answer in the comments when you are ready. 5, D. Perfect. So we've got a few Ds coming in. Anything else? Yeah, looks like it's mainly D. Yep, D, D. Okay, well, everyone's gone with D. So yeah, this again is a trick question. An easy thing would have been to look at is we can instantly see here again, it says maybe, some rowies, maybe owies. Does it give us information to say that's not true? No, it doesn't. And if you look through each of these other answers, it doesn't make sense that they're to be true. And so, as we mentioned before, it's really a big red flag whenever we see maybe. As we talked about here, are means definitely. It's a much higher standard of proof. Whereas possibly is much, much lower. It just has to be possible, not proven. So whenever you see an AB, that's a really big indicator that that could be the correct answer. And I'll skip straight to that one. Let's have a quick look at this one, which someone also sent through, and so let's give it 36 seconds to go through this one now. Get started and go. Okay, that's quick. A few A's. Yeah, perfect. Correct answer is A. Why is it A? Well, the method that I normally use is just looking for commonalities or uncommonalities. And you can really see if we look at what's common between all of these. Ling is the only thing that's common between all of them. And what's common in terms of the English translation, it's you. And so that was a fairly easy one. Correct answer was A, as everyone found. I'm going to give you just 20 seconds this time on this next one, because again, it is probably the type of one for a lot of students where you want to be answering it faster. And so the timer starts now. Very good. Got a B. Few seconds left. Done. B. Okay, perfect. Look, looks like everyone who sent through their answer has got this one correct as well. Perfect. All correct. B, 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 B. Yeah, so again, if Hugh symbolizes the opposite of SGH, what does this mean? And so we know that from looking at the other ones, that Kentry and Q, they were in I am happy. And so we can assume that one of them means I and one of them means one of them means I and one of them means an. And so we're just looking for what is the opposite of happy. And as everyone has picked, sad is the opposite of happy, and so B was the correct answer. And so, as we quickly mentioned, these are probably the type of ones where, like a few of you got in time, if you can do them in 20 seconds, that's saving you 16 seconds, which now if you come back to some of these more difficult ones, like this one, or maybe not this one, but this one, or particularly also this one, then you're going to have 55 seconds on these ones, which is going to make it a lot easier. 52 seconds, 55 seconds, around that amount. So we've got one more essay to run through today. This one is a little bit more difficult to read, and so I might just increase it to make it easier for me to read as well. Let's have a look. So it says, physical education, quite a controversial subject. Some people like it, some people don't, but it should still be a compulsory subject in all school curriculums. And so this one is, I'd say number one, it is very clear. It is very clear what the stance is. What my questions would be is physical education, is it quite a controversial subject? That would be something which I'd say as an examiner, is it definitely a controversial subject? Potentially it was maybe a little bit strong the way we started, but I'd say it's clear, so that's okay. Some people like it, some people don't. Again, ideally, if we can write in slightly more of a formal way, if we can. So we do have to remember it is a persuasive essay. It's not sort of like a message we're sending to a friend. So if we can make it more formal, that's one key thing that I really focus on. And if we wrote this in a more formal way, it probably would be a little bit stronger. And so how can we write that in a more formal way? Maybe we could say, there's been much debate as to whether physical education should be a compulsory subject in all school curriculums. That's probably what I would say. It's pretty simple, it's clear, sounds fairly formal. And I'd just say that despite the increasing pressure for it to be made compulsory, or despite the increasing pressure for students to have choice of which subjects they choose, it should still be a compulsory subject in all school curriculums. Again, that's really clear stance. And then let's have a look at the arguments here. So as it would provide a better chance for improved physical health. Yeah, so that's pretty strong. I would kind of say, how does it lead to a better chance for improved physical health? Ideally, if we could say if we could change that to something a little bit stronger. So if we could said it should be made compulsory because physical activity, because it's been shown that physical activity is vital, regular physical activity is vital for all growing adults. Something like that would be a little bit stronger potentially, and would train the mind in thinking. It's the same thing with this one. I feel like maybe they weren't super clear enough in terms of exactly what it means. So in terms of training the mind with thinking, I kind of think it's certainly possible that it could train the mind in thinking, but how? And I know that it is obviously the introduction, we don't have to explain everything, but I would really say the point has to make sense on its own in that first opening paragraph. Trying to make sure that on its own people can see the connection and say, yeah, that makes sense, rather than if it's sort of just hinting at it, but the people aren't sold until they read the paragraph, or they don't understand it until they read the paragraph. I think it's probably not enough. And so probably the simplest way of explaining that is people must understand your point in the opening paragraph. An introduction. So for example, if you said for the training your mind in thinking, if we said that, and physical activity has been shown to improve cognitive function or something like that, it will be a little bit clearer than that one, for example. And so let's have a look at the first paragraph. Let's see how you've expanded on it. So first of all, to be participating in physical education is to train the body. Yep, that's clear. This will positively impact the students as they'll be physically fit, so not too fat or scrawny either. So I think up until that point, it was really clear. But I would be careful of saying not too fat or scrawny either. It's potentially, number one, it might not be formal enough using the word fat or scrawny. It's probably more what you would look to talk about in a more casual setting rather than a formal essay. And so I probably would try to avoid that type of thing. An example is you could have said, so they are not overweight or underweight is something which would sound a little bit more formal. And so be careful with that. And breathing will be enhanced. You say, yes, that is interesting. Again, just we'll see if you do go on to prove this or not, but if you say something like breathing will be enhanced, you have to back it up. So one key thing which I'll put is you do need to back up claims. Unless it's really obvious. So if you said, for example, if will physical activity lead to better health, you probably want to have one level of evidence to prove that. If you have no evidence, and you've made that statement, it's not enough. Same thing if you say breathing will be enhanced. We need some sort of evidence as to how breathing will be enhanced. This can be seen in characters such as Kobe Bryant, who would tirelessly train his body, and with his dedication in high school to sports, he was able to create an astronomical impact globally. Therefore, PE leaves a positive impact on the students who do, let's say, who do enjoy the subject or who do engage in the subject. But I'd really say probably this paragraph as a whole, it's not as strong as it could be, probably just because of the argument. So first of all, to be participating in physical education is to train the body. I think because that wasn't super specific, it made it a little bit difficult for you to really back it up. Because the issue that I see with using the Kobe Bryant example is if it's to be made mandatory for all students, Kobe Bryant was probably an exception. So I'd say he was the one student from the class or from the 10 schools or the 100 schools who actually became an elite sports player. And so my rebuttal would be, should we make it mandatory if one student from 10 schools or 100 schools ends up becoming a professional player? And so I think it probably didn't fully back up your argument as well as you could. And I think that probably just stemmed from the argument maybe wasn't specific enough. So for example, if you had have just said instead, first of all, participating in physical education teaches students healthy habits from a young age. These healthy habits include the ability to be comfortable playing sport, the ability to be comfortable going for runs and walks and having an understanding of how to engage in these things so they feel more confident. And you could say, for example, before students do PE, a lot of students aren't comfortable playing a lot of sports, and PE is often the first time they learn how to kick a footy or to run or to do, maybe not run, but to do other things. that would be a lot more compelling. And really, the reason it was easier to explain it was because the argument was more specific. And so if you're ever struggling to come up with evidence and claims, I'd really just make sure that you've got a specific argument. And this really does lead into what we talked about earlier, where when you do have better arguments, it's often also a lot easier to explain them. And so I really can't emphasize enough, between now and your exam, really spend the time to come up with really good arguments, chat with your parents, chat with friends, debate each other, come up, just even get these prompts and spend 10, 15 minutes coming up with as many ideas as you can with a parent or even just yourself. Come up with, rather than just 2 ideas, come up with 30, just as an exercise. And you'll find that when you have a really good argument, it's so easy to explain because it's already compelling on its own. And so, yeah, I've really focused on specific and compelling arguments to make this one a little bit stronger. Let's now have a look at the next paragraph. Again, I'll make it a little bit bigger. So the next paragraph says, furthermore, it will enhance the student's thinking. So I do like how you had one on body and one on thinking. I do just think the explanation could have been a little bit stronger. Otherwise, I do like the way that you did that. P will permit students to have a deeper understanding of the body. Very good. And will also have a clever understanding of their surroundings. Take soccer, for example. To play proficiently in soccer, the individual would need to know which goal to score in the boundaries, their teammates and the opposition, and much more. Same thing with here with formal writing. We probably want to eliminate saying things like much more. So I just focus on saying, make sure it's formal. Otherwise, that point was really strong. I thought the way you explained it, I think it was a really good example of how you use logic to explain something. So you said P will permit students to have a deeper understanding of their body, and this will allow them to have a clear understanding of their surroundings. Take soccer for an example. It's a really good example, and you use logic to explain how soccer could be used in that situation. It's really good. I'll just, as I said, avoid much more because it's a little bit too casual for a formal essay. And so I kind of think, imagine you're writing this, imagine you're speaking to a school teacher or a principal. How would you sort of speak to them? You'd speak in a bit of a more formal way than you'll speak to your friend. And that's kind of how this essay should be. And so to be able to quickly react to a changing environment, identify the best moves in the provided situation would grant the person a larger view on not only sport, but also the basis on how to complete tasks, hence leaving another positive impact. I think that argument is actually really strong. So it's something that's definitely different. I haven't seen students use this argument before, but I think you've explained it well. Same thing, the key thing here is I really just follow you making sure you follow the teal structure. So when you say here, hence leaving a positive impact, I would say on what's it leaving a positive impact on? Number one, and how does this link back to the prompt? So the prompt was, should physical education be mandatory in schools? Always make sure you're using the teal structure. So topic sentence, provide some background information on your point. Explanation, explain and expand on the point. Evidence, have some evidence, which you've done well. So you've done those 3 things really well, but just make sure you link it back. So therefore, suggesting that physical education should be mandatory or should not be mandatory. You always want to link it back to your stance, because the way you think about it is if you're debating and you're debating someone, when you make a point, you want to then be able to drive into them why your stance is correct. So you've said all these good points, and then you want to say, therefore, because of all these points, physical education should be mandatory or should not be mandatory. You really want to drive that in. So let's have a look at the rebuttal here. So it says, well, what if they get injured? That is certainly a possibility, right? One thing I would be really careful of is rhetorical questions. If they are used well, the examiners can not mind them, I would say. But generally, in a formal piece of writing, you want to avoid rhetorical questions as much as possible. And so personally, for me, what I would recommend is I'd say some critics would argue, or some scientists would argue, that when students are young, they're more likely to get injured, or by making physical education mandatory, the number of injuries would rise. And I'll just keep it at that. It's very simple, it's very clear, and it's a little bit more formal in nature. That's personally what I'll do. And I'd probably recommend being very careful with rhetorical questions, and personally, I would probably recommend avoiding them. And it says here, well, they'll be taught on what to do, no more and no less. So it's a very slim chance that it's much better benefits. Same thing with this. I think the writing tone could be a little bit more formal, saying, well, that we taught what to do, no more, no less. Is maybe a little bit broad. How can we make it more specific? So two things I'd say with that is make it more specific and make it more formal. So what I would say for this paragraph, I'd say some scientists have argued that making physical education mandatory will lead to more injuries. However, if schools will implement strict training, students will be required to warm up before they begin the session. And there'll also be a nurse on hand to assist students in case they start to develop any injuries. That's very clear, it's very strong, and it's simple. And it's the type of thing they're probably going to be looking for. Conclusion, ultimately, each school across the world should make physical education mandatory and an essential aspect of each curriculum, as it will enhance both mental and physical health of their students. So I think overall this conclusion is really good. It restates your stance, it restates your true arguments, it's clear, it's in more of a formal tone. And so I think, yeah, from a conclusion standpoint, strong. So really as a whole with this essay, the key things for all students to really think about is make sure you back up your claims. If you're making any claims, make sure you back them up with an explanation and evidence, and you always link it back to the topic. So once you've made a really strong point, you want to drive in your stance so that the examiner knows, okay, wow, that's strong. I'm starting to believe that stance now. Again, it's really important to use a formal tone. Things like rhetorical questions and questions in general sometimes potentially make it seem less formal, and so I would personally avoid them. Same thing with how do you think about what's the right level of formality? I just think, what would you say? What would you write if you're writing to a principal or to someone who's quite important and has a high level of stature? How would you speak to them? That's more what we're looking to do with an essay. It's not how we'd speak with our friends. It's more in a formal environment. And then often when you're struggling to back up claims, often it's just because the point either isn't strong enough or it's not specific enough. So always try and make it as specific as possible and make it as strong as possible. And then, yeah, as we said here, always link back to your argument. And so this is actually all the questions that we've got to cover today. I know we've ran a little bit over time again, going for an hour and 23 minutes. What I will do was, I know that I'm sure there was more questions which students sent through, which we didn't have time to cover today. If there's anything that's really pressing that you would like us to cover, if it's an essay or something like that, send it through. And I'll be able to provide you some feedback through email. Otherwise, thanks everyone for coming to this Q&A session. I look forward to seeing you in more classes. There's probably going to be at least another 2, so reading and creative writing, and then another Q&A to help you with those ones and all this stuff again. So thanks everyone for coming. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and good luck for your preparation. Thanks everyone.